On this, the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Eric Hassell and Son Limited, the board, the shareholders, the Eric Hassell family have commissioned this video entitled From Saba to Barbados, the Maritime Legacy of Captain Eric Hassell as a gift to the people of Barbados. Established during the immediate post-independence period, 3 years after Barbados became an independent nation, Eric Hassell and Son has been a vital conduit linking Barbados with the region and the wider world, providing a means by which Caribbean people could connect with each other. From its inception, through the inter-island trade, the company has played a significant role in the region's maritime industry. On behalf of Eric Hassell and Son Limited, I would like to dedicate this series to the people of Barbados, our forefathers, the current generation, and the future generation of entrepreneurs.
Erica Luke of Eric Hassell and Son group of companies, respecting that solid foundation on which the business was built and reaching out to a younger generation of entrepreneurs, testimony of the community-spirited nature of the business. Hello and welcome to From Saba to Barbados, the maritime legacy of Eric Hassell. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always. Thanks for your time. On June 25, 2011, Barbados joined a group of nations with World Heritage Sites when Greater Bridgetown and its garrison was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. This inscription was a tremendous feat for this island. From Saba to Barbados, the maritime legacy of Eric Hassell is in concert with the maritime activities, those events that occurred in and around the wharf here in Bridgetown, and those events that were detailed in the dossier presented to UNESCO, which resulted in Barbados' inscription. What you are about to experience is an interesting account of a Barbadian whose life and service exemplified the words of our national anthem and pledge, pride and industry. A loyal son who, through hard work and dedication to family and an unwavering determination to leave Barbados a better place than how he found it, has today written his name on history's page and has left an enduring legacy of which Barbados could be justly proud. From Saba to Barbados, the maritime legacy of Captain Eric Hassell is an interesting account that started in the northeastern Caribbean island of Saba and moved across to Barbados. And it is right here at this point, the arrival point of the careenage, that much of the activities occurred. UWI lecturer Dr. Henderson Carter is standing by the Blackwood screw dock. Dr. Carter?
One of the reasons why we're here is that we are talking about Eric Hassell, a schooner captain, and Eric Hassell shipping. And this was the hub for schooner traffic way back into the 19th century. And I want to start the Eric Hassell journey talking about Saba. I think this is where we ought to start. Saba, because the Hassells came from Saba, and we need to start there. Now, Saba is about 5.1 square miles. That's only about 50 acres of land in the North Caribbean area.
I'm not far from St. Martin. So today, if you were to go to Saba, you would fly from St. Martin or take a ferry. The flight is about 15 minutes. But back in that time, as you know, everybody traveled around the Caribbean if they could afford to by boat, by sailboat, sailing vessel. And this is one of the primary economic activities of Sabins in this very small island. It's a volcanic island. It's almost completely vertical. There are no beaches, so it's very unlike Barbados. What little beach does exist is a bit of a rocky beach, but it's basically a volcano sticking out of the ocean. And a lot of the environmental conditions actually limited settlement over the centuries in Saba.
Well, let us step back further and get a sense of the history of its settlement, or rather the available records of its settlement.
First, Saba was colonized by the French, the English.
And then the French got pushed off by the British, and the British became islanders there for that. And they chose it because the British were pirates. They could defend the whole of Saba because there was only one path up, and it was a big rock up the top of the hill. Anybody tried to come up the hill, they rolled rocks down on them. So it was a fortification in its own right.
And then the Dutch. As you know, countries in the 17th and the 18th centuries change hands frequently. And Saba was one of those countries. In 1816, the Dutch controlled Saba. And right up to about the beginning of the 19th century, Saba was controlled by the Dutch.
So what you had in Saba was a very small population, probably around the time that the Hassell left Saba. It was only a population of about 2,200 people. That population was evenly divided between white Sabins and black Sabins. So again, very different from Barbados, where there's a majority African-descended population. And that was really driven by the fact that it never really developed a plantation-style economy in Saba. In fact, most of the settlement for the period of European rule and settlement was always driven by the maritime industry. There were very small plantations where they did exist, but they were never really very profitable.
The questions to be asked are, why were they not profitable? What has the research unearthed?
So where they could grow food, obviously they would really relied on imports, as most of the Caribbean did at the time. Particularly their trade with St. Eustatius, which in the 18th century was, late 18th century was like the Paris of the West Indies. It was so, had such a lucrative trade with the United States, especially during the American Revolution. So they really relied on trade from St. Eustatius and St. Martin.
We're still in the island of Saba. Interestingly enough, the background and its history provide that foundation on which this series is built.
You know, a lot of research has not necessarily been done on the slavery period in Saba and what that looked like, because it was very different from the orientation of the rest of the Caribbean, not being a plantation-based economy. From what I have gleaned from the sources, it seems to me that white Sabins worked very closely with black Sabins in trying to eke out an existence on Saba. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't segregation. That doesn't mean that there wasn't discrimination and a difficult experience for enslaved Sabins during slavery. Slavery ended in 1863. And we do have reports of black Sabins leaving, participating in resistance strategies, leaving and going on to Puerto Rico and other territories, trying to escape where they live. So that would suggest to me that the experience of being enslaved on Saba before emancipation and being in this kind of intimate space where slavery exists might actually have been brutal, but in a different way than what we would see on plantation economies in the rest of the Caribbean.
The model that we have gotten so used to here in Barbados and other islands, especially those in the Eastern Caribbean, that model does not apply to Saba. Now, what were the experiences in Saba?
You cannot apply the same kind of historical models from a Barbados or Jamaica or Trinidad to an island like Saba. It just has a different history. It has different people. It has a completely different economic orientation. And I think if we understood a little bit more about that kind of diversity as it exists in the Caribbean, we would understand so much more, not only of our present, but of our past. And I find that amazing, actually, about this small little island, that it could have this kind of reach. And not only in the Caribbean, but to New York and Rhode Island and even around the world. There are examples of Sabin captains participating in the industry to this day that are working everywhere.
That explains the maritime industry. What about present-day agriculture in Saba?
In terms of their local crops, where they can, they actually do grow sugar. And again, they would try to sell this and try to sell it on to get cash into the economy. But they're also growing other crops. And then goats. There are lots of goats on Saba, so that is a kind of a primary protein source. And because of the maritime influence, fishing is a very, very important part of Saban culture. Even though most of around Saba is a marine reserve today, historically, fishermen would have gone out to the Saba Bank, which is one of the richest places for fish resources in that part of the Caribbean.
And most Sabans are seafaring people. They love the sea. Fishing is an important activity for Sabans.
Families participating in the maritime economy together. So even if men are going out to sea, women are still contributing to the labor of the household by being able to let their husbands go out and work and help the family survive economically. But they're also participating in much needed labor in the home. So they are trying to find, especially in Saba, they're trying to find ways of participating in a cash-based economy by doing needlework, making hats. There are reports of people making shoes, for example.
Shirley Chatterton, who is the daughter of the late Captain Peace, has special memories of that embroidery introduced by Dr. Tara Ennis. Mrs. Chatterton now regales us with that interesting memory and how her aunt monetized the making of hats.
My aunt and my great aunt, they used to do some embroidery work called drawn thread. And this was a Saba thing, so that they brought with them. And this apparently was what the women did in Saba to earn money. So they would pull threads out of linen cloth, and whatever they did with a needle, they would do beautiful lacy type things. So drawn thread is definitely a Saban thing. Also, they would make baskets out of straw. Yeah, baskets and hats. And in those days, everybody wore hats. When I was a child, every man, woman, child, everybody wore a hat. Not necessarily shoes, but a hat. So her hats were she did a very good trade with her hats.
And all of these activities contribute to the economic survival of the family, but also childcare. They're providing their families with much needed childcare, and also in times of disaster and hurricanes, they're the ones who are responsible for shutting up the house and making sure that the household is safe and secure. So women are very, very important in terms of their labor, both in Saba and in Barbados. There's also the tradition of Saba lace, which is a very well-known tradition in Saba, which is kind of a special type of needlecraft that was taught to women. And through a mail order system, they would send examples of this to the US. And this is, again, some of the ways that they used to bring cash into their economy.
Geographically, Saba is a very small island with a rising landscape. This was challenging for communication purposes as it relates to the road network.
Saba, being such a small island, you would think that all of the different communities would have been easily connected. But in fact, it wasn't until 1958 that a road connected the major communities, about 4 or 5 communities in Saba. So the capital, or the main city, the bottom, which is not in the bottom. It's actually 300 meters above sea level. It is the wealthiest place on the island, but there are other settlements in and around the island that people had to get to, and this limited trade, it limited communication. People mostly had to walk before 1958. And in fact, the person who was responsible for building the road, the Dutch basically said it was a road that could never be built, but it was built over 20 years. So again, that speaks to the resilience of Sabins and their kind of ingenuity, their commitment to make the impossible possible. I think that was communicated to the rest of the region as well. So yeah, very, very interesting. I always call them like a hard Scrabble people. They really did the most that they could do with a very small island, rocky outcrop, no water, they have to catch water, very limited resources.
But they didn't have any trade. Only the schooners went there because Saba didn't have a proper landing area. When you landed, you had to come in with a rowboat. And then when people on the shore had to help you because as you came off the boat, you had to run in the surf and grab the boat and run to the beach with it. It was dangerous. And then you had to get out of the bay, you had to climb 280 odd steps, which were just dug into the side. There's a road there now.
So when you brought things into Saba, they actually had to be carried up, not even by donkeys or mules, but by people. People had to bring those things up on their backs from the sea. When you see a car being landed, the first car being landed in, there's no port. It's actually being thrown in the water on some pallets and being brought into the shore once this road is built. It's fascinating. It's a very fascinating island.
Now, to get a better sense of one of the major challenges back then on the island of Saba, Richard Goddard shares an experience of transporting a piano from Barbados to Saba.
But in those days, my grandfather had to get a piano to Saba. So you get it off the boat, put it on 4 men's shoulders, and they walked it in up to 500 steps to the town.
Now, how do you get there? Mrs. Chatterton recalls experiences of arriving on Saba by plane and being driven on the island.
The plane actually seems to stop over the runway, and then it lands. So the runway is, you can imagine, as long as this room. And it just seems to do that. And then you get in a taxi, and you go up and up and up and up and winding until you get to the top. And then you go down to the bottom, which is the main town.
Like other islands, Saba has its share of peculiarities. As it relates to customs and traditions of the people, this one is indeed peculiar.
And I had an uncle who was living there at the time, and he told him that his sister Ida's son Richard was coming to the island. Everybody wanted to meet him because in fact we were all connected one way or the other. I remember going to one was a Captain Simmons. When we knocked on his door, he opened. His wife was there. He come in and was nice to hear you. I'd like to see you. But when he first did take us into his bedroom and showed us his coffin. It was customary when you had a coffin made and you showed it off. As a woman would show off her sideboard with her cutlery. You showed off your coffin, and the coffin was kept in the bedroom.
Those peculiar features continue.
The story goes that it was a big wedding. Saba had about 2,000 people, so everybody was kind of connected by blood or marriage. And they had a big wedding, and they served Johnny cakes and booby eggs. And Johnny cake is what we call a bake, and a booby egg is a seagull egg. And said that the reception, it cost $4 and down there $5. That was the whole wedding.
These are truly the distinguishing factors of an island and its people, the fascinating stories and their experiences. Now, what is Saba like today? What are the drivers of the economy? And what is its association with the Netherlands?
still a very small society. The population today in Saba is just under 2,500 persons, so it's grown a little bit. But that dependence on the maritime economy, like most of the Caribbean, has actually shifted now to tourism. So tourism is a main economic earner for Saba, but so is offshore medical school. So there's a Saban University, medical university in the island that has actually created many, many economic opportunities for the island. And it is I think one of the highest per capita earners in the Netherlands Caribbean, or the Caribbean Netherlands. So in 2010, Saba decided, through referendum, it decided to become closer in its relationship to Holland. So it's considered a municipality of Holland, and it's probably one of the most successful of the islands that decided to do so. So out of Saba, Bonaire, and St. Eustatius. So in 2010, both Curaçao and St. Martin decided to be constituent countries of the Netherlands, but these became municipalities of the Netherlands. But as I said, Saba is doing well, and I think that is down to the heritage, the legacy of economic survival, of not being insular, but moving out beyond the confines of the small little island that you might find yourselves on. And yeah, economically they're doing very well, and socially also doing well, inviting new people into the island. So you see Dominicans, Haitians, Colombians, kind of adding to the ranks of the island.
Now, what about the Sabans who have moved away from Saba and have taken up residence elsewhere?
I think they went back fairly frequently because obviously they had the means to do so, especially being sea captains or being able to kind of navigate what ships are passing where. They're certainly able to send back money and other gifts to Saba. I've done oral histories with people where they've moved quite frequently between Saba and Barbados. Vonnie Hassell, for example, who was an Every before she was a Hassell, another Saban name, she reports, she passed away, but she reports that she was made in Saba but born in Barbados, which tells you that, again, there must have been a very frequent traffic between the two islands.
Now, Saba recognized the importance of opening its borders and encouraging the free movement of people to grow the economy.
So in 1906, there was a decision by the Dutch government to reassert Dutch language education on the island. But Sabans, historically being Anglophone, really resisted this transition. So a number of them were attracted to Barbados because of its being an English-speaking colony, but also because of the quality of the education here. So a lot of them wanted to come to enroll their girls and boys in schools that would have been fee-paying schools at the time, like Lodge, Harrison College, Codrington Girls' School. A number of them wanted to come and make sure that their children had an English education. So that was one of the primary reasons why they're leaving to resettle in Barbados.
And that was important to many Sabans who decided that they would move from Saba to other parts of the Caribbean.
Well, that Barbadian connection became even more important. But let us step back a little further and understand how it all came about.
Because Sabans and Saban seafarers had already established a relationship with the English-speaking Caribbean. Saban sea captains were traveling up and down the region as far as Guyana and Trinidad and Barbados, and they wanted to continue that relationship. So we're saying, therefore, that the Hassells come into the picture because of this migration from Saba after 1900.
And this is what the Saban captains were involved in. And this is what Eric Hassell's grandparents and families and people that he knew in his community would have been doing for a number of years, even after emancipation in Saba in 1863. So Saba represents this space and time where the age of sail was so important to the economy of the islands. It's so much so that I think something like 70% of the boys and men on the island at any given time, especially in the end of the 19th century, were actually recruited to become seafarers all around the region, in fact, all around the world. And Saba, again, was this place where people could get training. There was a seafaring culture, a boat building culture. It's represented in its architecture. So the quality of woodwork, especially in the design of cottages in Saba, is all down to the shipbuilding skills and the orientation of the maritime economy. But that made it a very difficult place to live and work for the people who were left behind, because they were very dependent on a cash-based economy, so money that came back to the island through remittances. So I'm not suggesting that Saba was flush with cash. In fact, in any given point, families were struggling until their other family members could come back and send back money, and this created a lot of economic vulnerability in Saba, and I'm sure that was a deciding factor for some families relocating here, but not only some families, but other seafarers as well. So seafarers who left their families in Saba. I know that a number of them also settled here, and particularly in Bridgetown, where they could get work in the maritime industry.
And they've landed here in this roadstead. If we were to go back to 1900, schooners would have been docked along this wharf area. This cream building, which was once the immigration department, was the DaCosta building. And DaCosta himself had a fleet of schooners plying the region for a long time. So we look therefore at this area as a very important hub for schooner traffic in the period after 1900 and even before. The Hassells come to Barbados. They come and they settle in areas such as Belleville, but not only the Hassells. The other Saban families that are coming to the region as well. The Leverocks and the Simmonses and the Vanterpools. These are Saban families that are coming.
And so the story begins in Barbados, but that's where we end this week's episode of From Saba to Barbados, the maritime legacy of Captain Eric Hassell. Do join us next week at the same time as we continue with this exciting series. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always. Thanks for your time.